Welcome to Huddle Up with Matias Bueno. Today's guest, all the way from Eastern Canada, we have the bureau reporter for TSN, situated in Ottawa, Hanna. Claire, it's great to have you on. I know, like myself, you've been a nomad across this country. You've been living in all sorts of places. Now, finally finding yourself in the eastern part of our country, and slowly but surely inching yourself towards the East Coast so you can get back to the beautiful weather that is across the Atlantic Ocean. Welcome. It's great to have you on.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, I know. I feel like I've lived in every major city in Western Canada except for Victoria. So moving to Ottawa is a different shift, but I am pumped to just smell the air out here.
Ottawa has been the capital of our country. It is a city with lots of sports events, and there are great teams that have performed in Ottawa for years, many years before, but there's been a bit of a lull in Ottawa recently, with the Senators having struggled a bit since the 2017 conference finals appearance, as well as the Red Blacks going through changes with their front office, as well as struggling on the field a little more than I think Red Blacks Nation would like to see. How's your experience been in Ottawa so far? And what are some of your hopes for the opportunity you have to work in the great city of Ottawa and to hopefully see their teams recapture glory as they did in the past?
Well, I just got here, let's call it mid-October. And obviously I've been following the CFL for the whole season. I mostly followed the West Division because I was covering the Rough Riders. But I was aware of the Ottawa Red Blacks struggles, especially when, their number one and number two starting quarterbacks went down. And I think it's tough for fans, but these are pretty natural ebbs and flows within teams. It's so hard to just stay on top of your game forever. And so I think naturally you're going to have rebuilds and moments where you're just trying to figure out who your starting quarterback is and things like that. So I just, I'm not a fan. I just report on teams, but through my experience in sports broadcasting, it's just, you're going to see ups and you're going to see downs. And when the highs are happening, it's the best. And when the lows are happening, you forget what the highs are like. So, but my hopes for this job are just to kind of own the market and really be aware of what's happening within teams, even what's happening with the Belleville Senators and upward movement, who are players that should be, might be coming up on the horizon, and sort of being aware of where organizations are at in terms of who they might be thinking about bringing in. So, I'm just getting my feet wet right now. I like I mentioned before, it's not even been 2 months. And it's funny, I have a book that I've been reading right now by Chris Stevenson, who's with TSN Radio, called 100 Things You Need to Know or Do with the Ottawa Senators Before You Die. And I'm just reading that to try to familiarize myself with some of the history that, I wouldn't be aware of because I haven't grown up in Ottawa. So that's been a great book. So, and I thank him because he gave me a copy for free, but you can buy it at Chapters or Indigo.
I was going to say, speaking of that series of books, it's honestly super exciting because you get to really feel like you're engaging with someone that knows the fandom inside out like crazy. I know that my brother got a gift with the Raptors version for Christmas years ago. And I know one of my former guests, Rob Vanstone, he was the person who was graced with the opportunity to make one about the Riders, which I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword because while there are so many people that are not as educated on the Riders fandom like he is, every person in Saskatchewan also probably could have helped write that book because of how well immersed they are into the culture. And I remember when speaking with Rob about it, he is, first of all, one of the best delights to ever speak to in Saskatchewan media. And the second thing is, when you get to talk with someone like him who knows so much, it really makes you feel a lot more confident about your job. And especially when it comes to Chris's book for the Ottawa version, it's a cheat sheet to be able to help you be the best that you can be and really own the market, like you said, because then you don't have to worry about guessing as to, oh, well, is this good? Or is this something that's historically happened in Ottawa? Those books I find are really fascinating to read from any team.
Yeah, they're great. And okay, like I adore Rob Vanstone. He was one of the last people I saw before I headed out here because we walked our dogs together around the Wascana in Regina. But I actually have not read 100 Things You Need to Know About the Saskatchewan Roughriders, but I actually have 2 copies of his books that he wrote. One is sort of about that Grey Cup team in '69 and the legacies of the riders in the past, and they're even more detailed. And I've read those ones, and he puts these great little nuggets in, like when the Grey Cup, or when the riders won the Grey Cup in '89, and how he, you know, on the way back from, I think the game was in Toronto or Montreal.
Yes.
I should look at that
Toronto,
one.
yeah.
Toronto, thank you. Like the mayor of Regina at the time was on the flight back with all these riders, and the riders are just getting bombed, and they're throwing beer to each other like, hey, I need a beer here, back in like 27A. And the mayor was sitting beside Bobby Jerson, and Bobby like called for a beer, and somebody threw a beer, and it just hit the mayor right in the face, and they all had like a laugh, and the mayor kind of didn't care because he's like celebrating. But little nuggets like that, of course I would never know that. I was like 3 years old in '89. So getting to read about that stuff is so interesting, and I felt like I had a good grasp of the riders circa like 2016 to 2021. But yeah, only people like Rob, who have grown up there and been obsessed with the riders forever and covered them for such an extensive period of time, would have all those great stories and connections, you know, to just even call up Bobby Jerson and be like, tell me about that moment. So anyways, yeah, I've loved reading those history books. And so I'm just digging into the Ottawa ones right now.
Growing up, when you're in your childhood, you're from the city of Vancouver, the actual city of Vancouver. So we're not talking people who are like from Toronto, but they're from York, or they're from Scarborough and they say they're from Toronto. And the Vancouver version is they're from Langley or Burnaby or Pitt Meadows. And they're like, oh, well, I just tell people I'm from Vancouver because it's easier to say that. Growing up in the city of Vancouver, what were some of your favorite sports memories as a child? And what were the ones that really captivated you to really just be enamored into the eventual job that you do have now, working as a reporter, and also, I guess, leading up to your career in volleyball?
Okay, well, I actually remember the very first NHL game I ever went to. My grandpa lived in Calgary, but we lived in Vancouver, and he was a huge Flames fan. So he actually bought my dad and I tickets to go watch the Flames play Vancouver in the old Pacific Coliseum. And that's now not used, but it was this like old, I want to call it, like, at the time, I'm sure it was amazing, but it feels like a rinky-dink arena now. And the Vancouver Giants actually played there until just a couple of years ago before they moved to Langley. But we went to a game there, and we had such amazing seats. It was like we were just on the edge of the first bowl at center ice. So it's like the prime spot. And that was my first game. And I remember, I'm pretty sure Calgary won like 7-1. It was crazy. And I should go back and look at that. And it was probably from the 1991 or 92 season. But I remember players like Trevor Linden were on the team, Bure was on the team. And it was cool to see these players, because at school, I would be like, my classmates, I remember there was a kid in the class who always wore this Bure jersey in every PE class. And then to actually go to the game and see Bure on the team, and you're like, oh my gosh, like that's the player, it kind of was crazy to see the jersey. And I'm like, that's the actual guy wearing his jersey. And this was a really young memory. I was probably only 6 or 7 years old. I remember whoever was playing in net for the Canucks, and I don't remember who it was, got pulled. And I didn't understand that concept. I'm like, well, why would they take the goalie out? And my dad's like, oh, because he let in too many shots. And I was like, but he didn't mean to. My dad's like, yeah, but you just got to take the goalie out. It's like he said it, I can't remember the wording he used, but he's like, anyways, it was cute. So he was explaining this stuff to me. And then there was a fight, and I remember yelling so loud, like, get him in the face. And the people around me were laughing because there's this like little girl cheering on these men who are fighting. But it was such a fond memory for me. And then when I went back to play for UBC, I went to a lot of Canucks games, because as a fundraising initiative for the Thunderbirds, we would go and sell or help with the 50-50 ticket sales, and we'd always get to watch the third period. So, I mean, we'd miss the first two, but that was kind of neat. And that's when I started going to some BC Lions games. Dave Dickinson at the time was the quarterback of the BC Lions. So it was fun, because I remember watching him for the Lions. And obviously now I talk to him a lot as the head coach of the Calgary Stampeders. But yeah, Vancouver's not really known so much as a sports city, but I have very fond memories of watching sports in that city. So for me, it felt that way. But I also feel like I grew up in a Vancouver that's much different than it is now. It was like much more organic and granola, and prices of houses were like actually affordable. And now it's just a totally different ballgame.
And especially when you talk about how much the sports scene has changed. When I studied the history of the Grey Cup back until, I guess, the early 90s, because I was trying to do some comparisons between what has happened in the CFL since Winnipeg had last won before 2019. And if you look in the mid 90s, Vancouver was actually a bumping city when it came to sports. Sure, they didn't win the Stanley Cup finals, but they made it in 94. They won the Grey Cup at home in 94 against the Baltimore Stallions. And that was,
And the Grizzlies. We can't forget the Grizzlies.
Yeah.
But we also, yeah. And here's the thing. I remember when they got the Grizzlies, I was there, and I never went to an NBA game, but I do remember being out for dinner once with my parents, again, really young. I want to say I was like 10 years old. And we were at this restaurant, and like these giants walked in, like they were so tall, and we knew they were members of the Grizzlies. I'll never know who they were, but it was just like, oh my gosh, look at these guys. And that was really cool too, just to be, aware of the fact that the NBA existed in Vancouver. And I wasn't living there when the team was sold to Memphis, but that was really cool too. I think Vancouver might have missed an opportunity to make itself like more of a sports hub when, unfortunately, they lost teams like that. I don't know the details of what happened, but anyways, it was really cool.
Yeah, the Vancouver Grizzlies, that is a great point, because the Grizzlies they were only there for 95, 96 to 2000, 2001. So a very, very short run and no winning seasons. And they finished with one of the worst winning percentages in NBA history for any franchise, which is really unfortunate, because from what I heard from people who have lived in Vancouver for a very long time, they said that the Grizzlies were at least a popular team, that people would show up and they would get excited, and they were always happy whenever they won, and they would still support them even when they lost. But it's just unfortunate that Vancouver hasn't sprouted as a sports hub, like you said, without having a team in the NBA, or with the NHL team being able to, or just they control the majority of the fandom. And then if they're not good, then it's miserable. And then you look at the Lions, they have fair weather fans who only show up when they're good, and when they're not, then they close the upper bowl, which is just, it's kind of a shame. Like, the Lions have a great history, and they've been around for a very long time. And to see their fans only turn up when they're good is just, I guess it's a testament to the struggle of CFL teams in major markets. Whereas when you had the opportunity to cover the Riders, you could see that everyone would show up to every game, because there wasn't anything else for them to do in Regina. At least Saskatoon have the Blades and the Huskies, but Regina, they only have the Rams, and then they have the Pats, and then there's the Riders, and the Riders reign supreme.
Yeah, well, and I'll be you should be careful with what you say, because I remember as an outsider thinking, oh, well, that's why the Saskatchewan Roughriders have so many fans, because there's nothing else to do there. I just think it's an incredibly passionate fan base. And I think even if they had other teams there, the Riders fan base would just live on because of what they've been through, and because of the culture that's been built in Saskatchewan around the Riders. So just be careful with that statement, because they might come back at you for that one.
Well, that is a fair point. Okay, people do say the same thing to people in Winnipeg when the Jets didn't exist. They're like, well, people don't show up to Bomber games because it's cheap, and because you can go there and you can drink beer and do whatever, and it's going to cost way less than going anywhere else. And you can't really do anything else. But you are correct in saying that. And I do give a lot of respect to Rider fans, because they are super passionate. And if an NHL team did come to Regina, the Riders would still override them, no pun intended, because they do have the super, super deeply ingrained passion in their fan base. And considering the fact that they didn't win their first Grey Cup until 1966, and they had been a team since 1910. So they went 56 years without even winning their first Grey Cup. And then they went 23 years. And then they went until 2007 without winning again. And then they had to go through the heartbreak of losing back-to-back, especially the way they did in 2009. And then to overcome all of that, to win at Old Mosaic for the last time I ever could have hosted the Grey Cup in 2013. Like, I remember asking Rob about this. What is the most iconic Grey Cup victory in Riders history? They're all iconic because they're also spread out. but 2013 reigned supreme because of winning at home after the 13th man and then losing him back to back. So I do appreciate the correction because yes, while there are not many, like there's not a crazy amount of professional teams, they do have a very passionate fan base, and Rider Nation does deserve a lot of respect for being the actual lifeblood of the CFL. I know business-wise, people say the Argos need to be good for the CFL to be alive, but the CFL is alive because of people that watch the Riders and turn out in numbers, even when the team goes 3-15.
That's all. Those are all good points.
So I must ask you about having played volleyball at a super high level, doing your duty for Team Canada, as well as playing and becoming a national championship or becoming a national champion in university. What were some of your favorite memories with volleyball outside of the wins and the losses? Because you experienced a lot of success in your career.
Well, we got to do some great trips. And at that time in my life, those were really special moments because I didn't realize that with Team Canada, I would get to travel. So we, with Volleyball Canada, or sorry, with UBC, we actually did a trip to China one year. And this was after our first national championship. In 2008, we went to China, and we went to Beijing, and we went to Shanghai to play some teams over there. And it was right before the 2008 Olympics in Beijing. And that was pretty eye-opening. And of course, Beijing is once again hosting the Olympics now. It's crazy to think that I was there when they hosted the last ones, and it just feels like a couple of years ago, but I guess it's like, what, 15 now? More? I don't know. So that, I'd say that was a pretty exceptional trip, and like we bonded over a lot of things there as a team. I can't even tell you how much like I don't know, crazy we'd try all the food. Like I remember we found this bubble tea shop and we're like, let's do that. And I'm not even sure if that's based in China, but we got to see the Great Wall. And playing there, oh my gosh, this is wild. But we would be playing in these arenas, which were huge. And you got to remember, volleyball is really big everywhere in the world, you know, including China. There's some huge leagues in China where you can make hundreds of thousands of dollars playing professionally. I'm sure some people have $1 million contracts. But we were playing in this arena, and I remember we called a timeout and we're on the bench, and the front row was so close to the bench, and like everybody in the front row of like all the fans were smoking. And I was like, this is a really weird condition as an athlete to play in, where I'm like inhaling secondhand smoke while taking a timeout and trying to catch my breath. And then we did some training sessions with this team as well, this club team we were training with. And I remember during training, the coach would be sitting on the side. Here's how our coach, Doug Reimer, would look. He'd be so into practice. He'd be like, you know, hitting balls at us, running the drills. Their coach was sitting on the side. He had this tin, like a recycled, you know, chickpea tin, let's call it, with a cigarette, and he was using it as an ashtray, just sitting there coaching and just kind of like delegating. I mean, they were so good. They beat us every time. So maybe Doug Reimer needs to pick up smoking and just like smoke on the side and have that casual attitude. But it was so crazy just to see the difference in cultural coaching methods, if you will.
I find that really interesting because volleyball is, I honestly think that's probably one of the most underrated major sports that there is, because people see it in the Olympics, but it doesn't get as much attention, I guess, here in North America as it would in other countries. I know with my family, half my family being from Brazil, it's like they love volleyball there, right? Like,
here's the thing, you have to make the distinction. It is incredibly, you say it's not underrated. It is huge in the world. It's not huge in Canada and mostly the United States. Volleyball is bigger in the world than hockey, and it's not even a debate. Okay. There's incredibly massive leagues in Russia. I already mentioned China, Italy, Poland, Brazil, Turkey. I can go on. And like all these leagues I've mentioned have $1 million contracts, and it's like massive. And it's funny, I was thinking about this because I was covering volleyball. I covered Volleyball Nations League, which is sort of like a World Cup of volleyball as a tee up to the Olympics. I was in Italy, and there was a bubble, and like all the best of the best were there. And then I covered beach volleyball at the Olympics. And I was looking while I was doing some research. I always like to go through players' Instagrams because you find little nuggets, or, you know, maybe they had a cool moment. And I remember looking through so many players' Instagrams, and like so many volleyball players had over 1 million followers. And I was thinking to myself, like, do any hockey players have over 1 million followers? And it was really hard for me to find any. I'm not sure. I think Connor McDavid might be around the 900,000 mark, but I'm just like, to me, put it in perspective. I think volleyball just has more fans around the world than hockey, but you'd never know that in North America, unfortunately.
It is very unfortunate because when I went down to Brazil, like, people play volleyball there everywhere, on the beach, in gyms, if you can find one, because they're always super packed. And in Europe, volleyball is ginormous. People that play in Canada or the US, there aren't as many opportunities to play professionally here in North America as there are if you go across the ponds to Europe. I know here in Manitoba, there was several people who graduated from U of M or U of W who were really good, and then they go play in Europe, and then they come back and coach. And that's kind of the transition in their career to being more involved here locally. So you're correct. Like, volleyball is more popular than hockey worldwide, period, end of story. And it's not even close, because it's just, there's less barriers to entry. I mean, with hockey being quite expensive to play. Yeah. And I honestly just find volleyball a lot of fun. It's just, the action is something you have to see in real life. When I started working for Bison Sports, and like, when I saw it in real life, I was like, watching this on TV sometimes doesn't do it justice, how amazing these women and these men are playing volleyball. It's actually just incredibly outstanding.
I think you make it's really important to me. I don't like comparing sports, like which one's more exciting. It's like, it's always going to be up to the viewer, because for some people, they'd way rather watch tennis or golf than like cricket or football or whatever you want to call it. It's just preference. But I do think the barrier to entry is something that makes volleyball really accessible, because really all you need is, and you'll see videos of, developing countries that have literally, it's just a coat, or like a clothesline, and people are playing because it's all you really need, and just a ball. But whereas so many other sports, you need a lot of equipment. So I think that's something I love about volleyball. And I really wish there were more opportunities to play after post-secondary in North America. There's actually a league that was just developed in the States called Athletes Unlimited. And it's just a women's league, and it's really neat. And they're trying to do a business format financially where more money goes into the pockets of the athletes. So it's kind of like based every week. What they do is they'd have a different draft. So there'd be a couple captains, they draft different teams, and then there was a point system. So depending on how you did individually and as a team, you'd get points, and then you draft all over again and have a new team the next week. And based on how you did at points by the end of the season, you'd get a certain monetary amount. It was really neat format. I think it's going to be growing, but for example, in Canada, like, if you didn't have access to the proper information, or if you didn't know you can get an agent, finding opportunities to continue your volleyball career is really challenging. Whereas in Europe, if you've grown up there and you can see it, and then you can believe it, oh, this is what I'm going to go. This is my aim. This is my goal. And unfortunately, I wasn't really even aware of pro volleyball till I was 16 or 17. So that was unfortunate, but it is what it is. And just talking about it like this on podcasts, hopefully more people are aware of it.
100%. And that's part of the goal, I guess, inadvertently, of bringing attention to opportunities in sports that people don't even realize. Like, I know that when there's sports that people are just figuring out and trying to play in other countries, I find it super awesome, because again, going on to Brazil with my family, the first time that my brother and I pulled a football out of our backpack and started throwing it to each other, like, people thought we were from the NFL. I swear. Like, it was so,
oh my gosh,
it was so like, it was like an otherworldly experience. I swear. They looked at us like aliens, and just us being able to throw a 30-yard spiral to each other back and forth, like, where they were looking at us like Tom Brady and Peyton Manning. It was ridiculous, but not in a bad way, but in a good way, because to them, they were so captivated by something that they're not used to, but it's still sport. And like you said, the excitement is subject to the viewers' opinions and to their view. And so for them, they weren't like, oh, this is a dumb sport, who cares? They were like, wow, this is amazing. Like, can I throw it? And they were trying to like hold it like a little baby, like they're being super delicate because they had never seen it before. And they wanted to take a picture with it because it was just like this, it was like a UFO, but like they could actually hold it and it wasn't a ginormous spaceship. Whereas on the contrary, in Brazil, people there don't like playing golf. It's very, very hard to find golf courses. And because it is a sport that is for people who are, I guess, quite wealthy, because you obviously have to have a course. Like you can buy clubs for cheap and you can buy golf balls for cheap, but you can't just show up and start whacking it anywhere. You have to go to a course. So people there, A, the barrier to entry is again high, and B, people just don't really like the concept. So it's not really that popular. And it's just fascinating to see the stark differences between two sports in the same country that aren't really popular. One that people are very well open to and welcoming, and the other is not so welcome.
I'm so happy you got to see the Mecca of volleyball, because I will say I think Brazil is the Mecca. Their men's and their women's teams in indoor are phenomenal. The Brazilian women have won gold medals in like 2 of the last 3 Olympics, you know, or 2 of the last 4 Olympics. And their beach volleyball teams are just unreal. So I've never been to Brazil, so I'm very jealous, because that's where all the amazing athletes come from typically.
I was going to ask you, like, who's your favorite country to watch play volleyball besides Canada? And
well, I was a really big fan of, for men, France this past year. They won the gold medal, and I got to cover a lot of their games in Italy in May for the volleyball World League. And they have a very energetic team. They trash talk a lot through the net, so it gets really fiery. Their players just know how to get under skin of the opposition, just like little remarks here and there. They're libero, and I was a libero when I played Team Canada volleyball, so I'm always a little bit more keyed in on the defensive end. But his name's Grebenikov, and he's from France, but he's got a Russian background. He is just like flying all over the court in the back row, and all the serves, he passes them just like so perfectly. Anyway, so I love watching France men. For women, I'm a big fan of Thailand. They actually, they had this really crazy story this past year, but their whole team just before World League got COVID. It was like so many people in their program. I want to say 16 of them. And they had this amazing starting lineup, and all the starters had actually retired when they didn't qualify for the Olympics, just to make room for new players. They were done. So when all the current members got COVID, they were like desperate. And so they asked these 6 starters who had retired, they're like, can you guys come out of retirement and play? And they were like, well, we haven't played in 2 months, but okay. And they're just very creative. They jump like wild. They've got crafty shots, and they have all this experience. And watching them this season play for just the pure joy of the game was amazing. And they're fun to watch. So I'm going to say just this season, I was a big fan of the Thai women and the French men.
And I love those kinds of stories, because whenever people are watching, I know growing up as a kid, I think one of the biggest stories that came to light was like the Jamaican bobsled team. When you just see this group of people rally, and it's like, well, they came out of retirement and they're kind of just all strung together at the last minute. And here they are with just a super exciting style of play. And like you said, the crafty shots, and it just makes for a more entertaining game, because you know that there isn't a high amount of expectations on them to play like they're in their prime. And the fact that they're still able to compete is what makes it so amazing. And it's not like Thailand is a country that's like extremely volleyball dominant. Like they'll have great athletes.
You wouldn't expect them to be good. And honestly, if you saw these women, you would not think they were volleyball players. Like Plumjit, the setter, she's a little taller, but their hitters are shorter. Like you wouldn't think this is a volleyball team. And then they step on the court and you're like wowed by them and their jumping ability, but just their mentality and like looking at the court, putting in some roll shots. Anyways, they're so good.
What were some of your favorite sports to play growing up? As you mentioned, you've played volleyball at a super high level, but were there a lot of other sports that you really enjoyed playing when you were a kid?
Yeah, this one always surprises people, but I was a big badminton player. And I've got a cool story about this, but I grew up thinking that was a sport I wanted to go to the Olympics in. I trained really hard in Calgary, And at one national championship, this is how I competed at a high level of badminton. And I went to nationals one year in Winnipeg, actually. It was played at the Winter Club, I believe. Is that the one down kind of just out of downtown?
Downtown, yeah. It's close to Donald and River, I believe. Yeah.
That's the one. Okay, so I'm playing at the Winter Club, and I was in the quarterfinals, and I was playing. I can't believe I'm forgetting her name right now. Okay, anyways, I was playing this athlete. She's from Ontario. Oh, Jocelyn Coe. And so I'm playing Jocelyn, and she just whips me. She just beats me so badly. She was really good. And it was after that badminton moment that I kind of reflected, and I just started getting into volleyball. And I was like, I like the team aspect of volleyball a little bit more. I think I've got more potential in this. But I just eventually left badminton. Now, I was competing at the Pan Am Games in Guadalajara in 2011 for volleyball. And I remember you meet so many people in the village, and Canada has its own house. So you're meeting a lot of the Canadian athletes. And I was in an elevator and whenever you were kind of in a close space with another athlete, you're always like, oh, what sport do you play? How's it going? Who are you? How are you guys doing? It's just this family. And I was in the elevator, and we were like, oh, what sport do you guys play? And they're like, oh, we play badminton. And one of them had a gold medal and a silver medal around her neck. And I was like, oh my God, you guys, that's amazing. What's your name? And she's like, my name's Jocelyn. And I'm like, what is your last name? She's like, Jocelyn Coe. And I'm like, I played you when we were 15 years old. She was the reason that I almost pretty much gave up badminton. And I couldn't believe that I was at this same event with her, the Pan Am Games, and she was just still crushing it, which made me feel a lot better about, in a way, giving up the sport, because I knew I had lost to the best. But it also made me reflect on, okay, we both got to the same tournament. We took different paths. I changed my course, but I'm still here at the Pan Am Games. And it was just a really good lesson in being flexible, and maybe one door closes and another door opens, but you can still get to the same goals if you're willing to be adaptable. But anyways, that's my badminton Jocelyn Coe story. And I think she's still crushing it. So
that's a pretty incredible story, Claire, especially considering it's not that you weren't good enough to play badminton at a high level. You just came up against a brick wall in the best of the best. You really couldn't have faced anyone that was at a higher level. And I mean, you still both made it out of the woods to the same level, but just in different sports. So can't really be mad at that.
No.
So Claire, we are getting towards the end of our time here. So I wanted to ask you 2 rapid questions to have a little more fun before we part for today.
Sure.
My first question is, who's your favorite pro athlete growing up?
Jerome McGinley.
And my final question for you is, if there was one sport that you could have become a professional in that you've never played, what would it be?
Tennis.
There you have it. Thank you for listening to today's episode. And Claire, thank you for having been on today's episode. It was a great, great pleasure. I really enjoyed being able to talk about sports with you, especially about volleyball, a great sport that people need to check out a lot more because it is super popular worldwide.
Thanks for having me.
And thank you to the listener for enjoying today's episode with TSN Bureau reporter situated in Ottawa, Claire Hanna.